Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of sources, extract the most important nuggets, and transform complex information into accessible insights.
Glad to be diving in today.
Today, we're plunging into a topic that touches the very core of what it means to be human: identity itself. You, our listener, are coming from an elementary education background. You know firsthand how early children begin to form that fundamental sense of who they are, how they fit into the world around them.
It's something you see unfolding daily.
Absolutely. But what truly happens, when that deeply ingrained sense of self doesn't quite fit the tidy molds society often provides?
It's a profound question, and it really gets to the heart of what we're exploring today. Our sources challenge us to look beyond simplistic, conventional ideas of identity, particularly when it comes to gender. They open up new ways of understanding selfhood, not just for some, but, well, potentially for everyone. It's a truly expanding horizon.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack these incredibly insightful perspectives on the rich and diverse landscape of transgender experience and identity. We want to move past those basic, often binary definitions and truly explore the remarkable complexity of gender identity development.
We'll be looking at the latest thinking in academic psychology, exploring different lived experiences.
And crucially for you, discussing what all of this means for how we understand and support individuals, especially children, on their unique journeys of self-discovery. This deep dive is custom-tailored to give you a foundational yet truly profound understanding of this evolving field. Let's get started by laying some groundwork.
Okay, sounds good. Let's unpack a core distinction that is absolutely fundamental to our discussion: the difference between sex and gender. In everyday conversation, these terms are often used interchangeably. But in academic psychology, they mean distinctly different things.
Right. So when we talk about sex, we're referring to a biological classification. This is typically determined at birth, primarily based on observable factors like chromosomes and external genitalia. Think of it this way. A baby is usually assigned male or female based on these physical characteristics.
Usually, yes. But even at this biological level, it's not always a neat binary box. There are rare cases, sometimes referred to as disorders of sexual differentiation, where a person's chromosomes might not align with their external genitalia, or where their biological development follows a path that isn't strictly male or female.
It's a powerful reminder that even biology has its own spectrum, doesn't it?
Precisely. And this is where gender comes into play. Gender refers to the traits, characteristics, and behaviors that are culturally associated with one's assigned sex. So what does our society, our culture, expect from someone identified as male or female?
Like roles and stereotypes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This includes subjective judgments, stereotypes, roles, and even expressions of masculinity and femininity, as leading researchers in the field have highlighted. It's the social construct, the set of expectations and roles layered on top of biological sex.
And then we have gender identity. This is distinct again.
Yes, very distinct.
It's a person's internal, enduring sense of self as a boy or a man or a girl or a woman. This internal sense typically carries with it expected role behaviors, attitudes, dress style, and overall appearance. But it's fundamentally about your internal compass of who you are, how you perceive yourself deep down.
That internal feeling.
For someone grappling with this for the first time, what's often the hardest part for them to grasp about why these terms need to be separate? Why is this distinction so vital for understanding transgender experiences?
That's an excellent question. The core insight here is that when we talk about gender identity, we're stepping into a person's inner world, their psychological reality, which is entirely distinct from their biology, sex, or societal expectations, gender roles. This separation is your foundational understanding for everything that follows.
Okay.
If you understand that sex is biological and gender is a social construct and gender identity is internal, then the idea of someone feeling that their internal sense of self doesn't align with their biological sex makes much more sense.
Right. It stops being just about the body.
Exactly. It moves beyond a purely physical understanding to encompass a person's inner experience and their interaction with societal expectations. Without this distinction, the conversation around transgender identity remains trapped in purely biological terms, which simply don't capture the full human experience.
That clarity is powerful, and for you as an elementary education major, understanding this distinction is absolutely foundational. When you're in the classroom observing children, you're not just seeing their biological sex. You're seeing their gender expression, how they outwardly present themselves, and their emerging gender identity, that inner sense of self.
You're seeing the whole picture develop.
Knowing this helps you interpret their play, their choices, and their self-statements in a more informed, respectful way. It allows you to see the whole child, not just the parts that fit into preconceived boxes.
Exactly. And to frame this further, let's talk about what's considered normative gender identity development in early childhood. For most children, a clear sense of gender identity, that enduring sense of themselves as male or female, develops quite early, typically by age 3 or 4.
That early?
Yes, quite early. And this sense then tends to persist throughout their lifespan. We see stability in a child's self-labeling as male or female, usually occurring between ages 3 and 5.
So how might an elementary teacher, observing their classroom, see this normative development playing out? Imagine you have a pre-kindergarten class. You might notice a 4-year-old, let's call her Maya, who consistently, without prompting, says things like, "I'm a girl," or "girls wear dresses."
Right, very clear statements.
And she chooses to play exclusively in the home corner with dolls, insisting on wearing a particular sparkly dress-up gown every day.
Or perhaps a boy, like Leo, who gravitates only towards the construction toys, saying, "Boys build big towers," and always chooses a blue shirt.
They are very clear in their self-identification, and their preferences, play, and outward expressions align quite neatly with broader societal expectations of boy or girl.
This kind of consistent, stable self-labeling is what the research often points to as typical.
This clarity and alignment are what's considered the conventional path.
However, and this is where our deep dive truly begins, for transgender individuals, this straightforward linear path is often not the case. Their journey of gender identity development can be much more complex, defying those neat categories we just described.
Okay.
And that leads us to the crucial part of our deep dive, moving beyond the binary.
So if that's the normative path, what happens when someone's experience doesn't fit? This brings us to challenging those conventional models and understanding what transgender truly means. Our source defines transgender as a broad category that denotes individuals whose gender identity or their outward presentation conflicts with the sex they were assigned at birth. Or it can refer to individuals whose identity or presentation simply goes against those conventional, often rigid conceptualizations of being male or female.
It's often about mixing different aspects of what society labels as male and female roles or identity. It's an umbrella term, really.
Right, an umbrella. And it's important to acknowledge the historical context here.
Absolutely. The very fact that psychological research now includes extensive discussion of transgender experience signifies what the source calls enormous changes in our understanding. For a long time, the primary dilemma for transgender individuals was narrowly seen as a direct conflict between their psychological gender and their biological sex.
The idea being they just needed to fix the body to match the mind.
Sort of, yes. The healthy endpoint in this view was often presumed to be a complete transformation to achieve 100% male or 100% female, often through physical means.
This is what we often hear about in our popular culture, the trapped in the wrong body narrative.
Exactly.
It's a very common understanding, particularly for transsexual individuals who seek to bring their psychological sense of gender and their physical sex into alignment through a combination of physical transformation.
Whether it's through clothes, makeup, demeanor, hormones, or even surgery.
And a formal change in legal status. For many transsexual individuals, this alignment is precisely what leads to greater well-being and a profound sense of peace. They feel their true self is finally visible.
It can be incredibly affirming for them.
But the critical point is that while transsexualism is the most widely known form of transgender experience, it is by no means the only one. It's a significant piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture.
Exactly. And this leads us directly to the limitations of what we call the dichotomous model, that idea of only two distinct categories, male or female. Our sources emphasize that there's increasing evidence that these two-category models simply fail to accommodate the true complexity and rich diversity of transgender experience.
This is why the term transgender itself emerged. It came into use precisely because many individuals with more complex and ambiguous experiences of gender identity,
like feeling both or neither.
Exactly. Individuals who feel that they are both male and female, or perhaps neither male nor female, were really poorly described by those older models focused solely on transsexualism. They just didn't fit the existing mold.
And it's not just about acknowledging existing diversity. Our understanding continues to expand. Individuals with new forms of gender blending and bending continue to stretch the range and variety of identities that fit under that broader transgender umbrella.
It's a continually evolving understanding, constantly challenging us to widen our perspective.
To truly grasp this, let's turn to some powerful quotes from interviews, which really highlight this lived experience of fluidity and complexity. One person shared, "Because I am so openly gender variant and fluid, I reserve the right to express the truth of that in the moment. I believe in shape-shifting with truth. Is the goal to get from A to B, or is the goal to remain open to fluidity?" That's the key.
Wow, that really challenges the idea of a fixed endpoint. It makes you think about identity not as a destination, but a constant journey.
hmm Another person articulated, "I feel like there's tremendous pressure to have an external appearance and body that are consistent with the internal identity. I have spent much of my life desperately wishing I had a male body. But I'm starting to feel comfortable with the apparent contradictions between my female body and my male presentation. This contradiction is part of my strength and my identity."
This speaks to finding power in paradox, doesn't it? Embracing the contradiction.
It absolutely does. And finally, a particularly poignant one. "I think when you're born one and cross over to the other side, so to speak, you're really neither. Or both apply."
These are powerful statements that defy simple categorization and demonstrate the inadequacy of binary thinking for so many. They invite us to think in terms of a spectrum or even a multidimensional space.
Definitely more than just two doxes.
So, as an elementary education teacher, how might you actually encounter this idea of gender blending or bending in your classroom? It's not about diagnosing, of course.
No, definitely not. It's about observation and respect.
Right. But you might observe diverse presentations. For instance, imagine a child, let's call them Alex, who genuinely enjoys playing with toys that are typically associated with both boys and girls.
Like trucks one day, dolls the next.
Exactly. One day, Alex is intensely focused on building a towering castle with blocks and toy knights, completely absorbed. The next day, they might be deeply engrossed in imaginative play with dolls and a toy kitchen, creating intricate storylines. Or you might notice a child who expresses a desire to wear clothing from both sides of the aisle, like wanting to wear a dress but insisting on a bow tie, or a boy who wants to wear a skirt to school.
Or even just expressing feelings verbally.
Perhaps even more subtly, you might hear a child say something like, "Today I feel more like a boy, but yesterday I felt like a girl." These are expressions of an evolving understanding of self that simply don't fit into the easy boy or girl boxes we often default to. Your role here is to notice, to validate, and to create space, not to categorize or pathologize.
So, if the lived experience is this complex, how have diagnostic frameworks tried to keep up? Let's talk about gender identity disorder, or GID, as it was defined in the DSM-IV.
Okay, the diagnostic manual.
Right. This diagnosis was characterized by a strong and persistent cross-gender identification and a persistent discomfort with one's biological sex, along with clinically significant distress.
Historically, these criteria carried substantial weight. They were used by the medical community to police access to hormonal treatment and sex reassignment surgery, primarily for transsexual adults.
Access was often tied to this diagnosis.
It's worth noting that for those transsexual individuals who genuinely meet these criteria and undergo transition, studies have indeed shown markedly improved psychological outcomes, including higher self-esteem and more positive body images after surgery.
For them, it can be a deeply validating and necessary path to congruence. That's a crucial point about positive outcomes for those who meet the criteria and pursue that path. But here's the crucial critique. The vast range of transgender-identified individuals who claim they are both or neither male-female, or who adopt complex constellations of male-female identification and presentation, are not considered by the medical community to be appropriate candidates for sex reassignment.
They don't fit those specific criteria.
Exactly. Many in this group don't even seek complete sex reassignment. They might prefer to modify selected body parts or forego physical change altogether, focusing on social or legal modifications. This is because they typically reject the notion that they're simply trapped in the wrong body and therefore don't see a wholesale substitution of one gender for another as their personal goal or a solution to distress.
So the medical model didn't really have a place for them.
Pretty much. This diverse, gender-fluid group poses a fundamental dilemma for developing broad models of transgender identity development.
It certainly sounds like it creates a significant psychological dilemma for researchers and practitioners. They're left asking, is it healthy to claim a permanently liminal form of gender identity?
Right, like is being in between okay long-term?
And if identity is this fluid, how can we even speak of transgender identity development if no single identity goal can be identified, or if the stated goal involves a wholesale deconstruction of the notion of a fixed and stable self. I imagine that's a huge challenge to establish psychological frameworks.
It truly is. The DSM-3, as early as 1987, actually recognized a lack of coherent identity as a risk factor for poor mental health outcomes, highlighting this tension. So this isn't a new concern, but the increasing visibility of diverse gender identities has brought it to the forefront.
And the research hasn't caught up.
Well, what's astonishing, given the complexity we're discussing, is the scant empirical data available on these very questions. In stark contrast to the extensive research on conventional gender identity development, there's been very little focus on the developmental processes or the structure of transgender identities in non-clinical populations.
Really? Not much research there.
Very little. Longitudinal studies on this topic are almost non-existent. Most of the existing empirical research has actually focused on gender atypical males, usually in childhood, or on clinical populations. There's a particular dearth of empirical research on normative or resilient developmental outcomes among gender nonconforming and transgender natal females.
So the conventional models fall short, and the research is playing catch-up.
That's a good way to put it.
That makes the need for new frameworks even more urgent. If the old frameworks don't fit, where do we go from here to understand this incredible diversity?
Exactly. This is precisely where new, more expansive frameworks are emerging to help us grasp the journey identity. One prominent idea we see discussed is the debate between linear and nonlinear paths.
Linear versus not straight lines.
Pretty much. Traditionally, especially with transsexualism, there's been an implicit assumption of a linear identity development moving from one gender to a stable, unequivocal new one. The highest success in this context is often to pass as the desired gender, to accomplish such a complete change that the individual's history of questioning is replaced by a lived authenticity.
So the goal is consistency.
Often, yes. Many transsexuals, quite understandably, wish to be seen simply as woman or man, not trans man or trans woman. Their goal is congruence and integration into their affirmed gender role.
That makes perfect sense from the perspective of achieving congruence and reducing dysphoria. However, our source introduces a powerful critique. Identity development, especially for sexual minorities, is often abrupt, nonlinear, and recursive. What does it mean for an identity journey to be nonlinear, and why is that such an important concept for understanding gender identity in particular?
Nonlinear is crucial because it implies that identity isn't a fixed destination or a singular endpoint, but rather a dynamic, ongoing process.
Like it can change direction.
Exactly. It suggests that individuals might revisit certain stages, or that their journey might not follow a prescribed step-by-step order. For instance, some early models tried to map out a rigid step-by-step progression for transsexual identity formation, but they're now criticized for being too linear and not reflecting real-world experiences.
Because real life is messy.
Very much so. Nonlinearity means there can be exploration, changes, and even temporary states of being that don't necessarily lead to a predetermined outcome. It fundamentally challenges the idea that there's one predetermined path everyone should follow. It allows for the possibility of a moving target rather than a fixed goal.
That makes so much sense, acknowledging the incredible human diversity. This brings us to what our source calls the most important development in gender research over the past 2 decades.
Which is?
The realization that the transsexual trajectory is not the only or even the most common form of transgender experience. It's not a single pathway, but a tapestry of multiple individualized trajectories.
Exactly. Consider the conceptual model developed by Denny et al. In 2004. This model actively de-emphasizes the rigid gender binary that characterizes conventional models.
Moving beyond just male-female.
Right. Instead, it presumes the existence of parallel gender continuums that are inclusive of both male and female dimensions. This allows for individuals to strongly identify with both male and female dimensions, or with neither.
So you can be high on both or low on both.
Precisely. It's a framework that welcomes complexity, acknowledging that identity isn't just about choosing one side or the other, but can involve a unique blend. This is very much akin to Sabin Williams's differential developmental trajectories approach for sexual identity, which, rather than searching for one common pathway, focuses on identifying and understanding the multiple possible pathways within a population and the factors that cause them to converge or diverge.
It's about recognizing individual difference as the norm.
That's it, exactly.
That's a truly expansive way to view human experience. And to further illustrate this, Eakins and Ting in 1999 identified 4 distinct narratives commonly recounted by transgender individuals, which really highlight these different ways of experiencing gender.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, we have migration narratives. These are often recounted by transsexual individuals who emphasize the process of crossing over permanently from one gender to another. They speak of finding a home in the desired gender where the transition is seen as definitive and unequivocal. For them, it's about achieving a consistent, stable identity in their affirmed gender.
Like finding your true place.
Think of it like moving from one country where you don't belong to another where you finally feel at home. It's a one-way journey to a new, settled place.
Okay, that's clear. What's next?
Then there are oscillation narratives. These describe individuals who experience repeated movement back and forth across gender boundaries.
Back and forth. How does that work?
They might feel one gender identification is truer than another at different times, but they don't necessarily plan to adopt a permanent presentation on either side of the gender divide.
So the movement itself is key.
What's fascinating here is that the very process of moving back and forth is meaningful in and of itself. It's almost like a dance between 2 modes of being.
Interesting.
And importantly, Eakins and King noted that this oscillation, paradoxically, often reinforces the binary, because it's the very difference between the male and female sides that provides the energy and motivation for the border crossing.
Huh. So the crossing highlights the border itself.
It's the tension between the two that defines their experience. So it's about the dance between the two.
Okay. Migration, oscillation, what else?
In sharp contrast, we have negation narratives. These individuals speak of erasing or undoing gender.
Erasing gender.
This isn't just about changing their assigned sex, but about deliberately creating an ambiguous gender presentation by selectively adding or eliminating gender markers. It's about being ungendered or genderless.
Trying to step outside the system.
Kind of. The source even draws an analogy to science fiction fantasy stories that posit futuristic worlds beyond gender. It's about disrupting the very concept of clear-cut gender. It's almost like saying, I choose not to participate in this binary system at all.
Got it. And the last one.
And finally, we have transcendence narratives. These are similar to negation narratives in their aim to undo and subvert gender, but they have a more explicitly political aim.
Political how?
The negation and undoing of gender polarities are not just personal decisions, but are explicitly undertaken with the aim of dismantling the hegemonic power of gender dichotomies on a social and cultural level. Bornstein's Gender Outlaw from 1994 is cited as a paradigmatic example. Here, personal attempts to ungender oneself are fundamentally linked to larger political struggles that question the entire social basis of gender-related practices and politics.
So it's personal identity as political statement.
Exactly. It's a statement of personal identity that is also a statement about social justice.
Wow, 4 very different ways of experiencing and narrating gender.
This leads to a fascinating, great debate among theorists. Those who seek to destabilize the notion of a singular, stable gender identity, like queer theorists such as Judith Butler or Anne Fausto Sterling,
Who question fixed categories.
versus those who advocate for the substitution of an old false identity with the new, correct one, thereby validating fixed, albeit different, identities.
Who see it more like finding the true self.
It's a debate between a fixed destination and an ongoing journey, a very different vision of what authenticity even means.
And this brings us to the distinction of journey versus outcome. For transsexual individuals, especially those who seek to pass as their affirmed gender, the journey often has a defined end. Their personal gender transformation is viewed as a process with a clear completion point.
They reach the destination.
Right. In fact, some might even withdraw from transgender social and support groups once their new identity is successfully achieved, as the transgender label may cease to hold personal relevance. They've reached their destination and moved on.
That makes sense. Once they've reached their destination, so to speak, the journey itself is no longer their primary identity. But for those who seek to dismantle fixed notions of gender, as we saw in the negation and transcendence narratives, the process of questioning and transformation may prove to be ever-present with no definitive beginning or end.
The journey is the destination, in a way.
Exactly. The transitional process itself might change over time, with the fit between their psychological sense of gender and their physical presentation constantly shifting. For these individuals, no single identity goal is sought. Instead, the journey is itself the outcome, a moving target. The process of questioning and transformation is the identity.
It sounds almost like an ongoing artistic creation of self.
It absolutely is. And for you, as an elementary education major, understanding these diverse narratives is incredibly important. It helps you recognize the myriad ways children might express gender or self-identify, rather than expecting a single linear outcome.
Right, because kids won't sit neatly into just one narrative either.
Exactly. For example, if you have a child like Sam in your class, who one day wants to be called they and wear pants, and the next day wants to be called she and wear a dress, you might be tempted to think they are confused or going through a phase.
Which is a common reaction.
But based on these narratives, you can understand that Sam might be exploring an oscillation narrative, or the back and forth movement itself is part of their authentic experience. Or perhaps they are embodying a negation narrative by deliberately blending elements and not settling into one category. Not all children questioning their gender will necessarily want to fully transition to the other side. Some might want to explore the middle ground or simply be themselves, whatever that entails.
And that journey is just as valid and deserving of respect and support as any other.
Precisely.
So if we're moving beyond fixed categories and linear paths, what theoretical framework can actually help us understand this fluidity and dynamism?
This is where dynamical systems theory, or DST, enters the picture. It offers a powerful new lens.
DST, tell me more.
At its core, DST places change and transition at the center of analysis, viewing identity outcomes not as fixed points, but as states that are continually constructed and reconstructed over time.
So identity is always in motion.
In a sense, yes. This approach helps explain how complex patterns emerge, stabilize, change, and then restabilize over time. DST emphasizes transformative, bidirectional, changing interactions between various factors.
Like what factors?
On one hand, you have endogenous factors, which are internal to the individual, things like genes, hormones, existing skills, capacities, thoughts, and feelings.
Inside the person.
On the other hand, there are exogenous factors, which come from outside the individual, such as relationships, experiences, cultural norms, and family history.
Outside influences.
It's the constant interplay between these internal and external forces that shapes development. Think of it like a weather system, constantly changing based on interacting forces, not just a set trajectory.
Okay, that's a helpful analogy.
And within DST, there are some really fascinating key concepts. First, phase shifts.
Phase shift.
These are periods of fundamental reorganization in a system. It's when existing patterns of thought and behavior break down and new patterns emerge to take their place. Think of it like a caterpillar undergoing metamorphosis into a butterfly, a complete reordering, not just a gradual change.
The big jump in development.
Right. Then there's self-organization, which is the spontaneous development of order within a complex system. It's not dictated from outside. It arises naturally from the dynamic interactions within the system.
Like a flock of birds forming intricate patterns without a single leader.
Exactly.
And closely related to that is emergence, which refers to the coming into being of altogether novel behaviors or experiences through these dynamic, often unpredictable interactions.
Something new appearing.
It's about something genuinely new arising from the process that wasn't simply a combination of the existing parts. It's the aha moment, where something unexpected but coherent comes into being.
DST has been applied to a wide range of human phenomena, from understanding how motor development unfolds in infants to the dynamics of emotion, personality, and even language.
And crucially for our discussion today, it's been applied to gender development.
So let's apply this powerful framework directly to transgender identity development.
Okay, how does DST view transgender identity?
From this DST perspective, the fundamental task for a transgender individual is not simply to discover, acknowledge, and reveal a deeply hidden true self, as if it were always there waiting to be found.
So it's not like digging for buried treasure.
Not exactly. Instead, it's about creating one's true self through a dynamic process of self-reflection, perspective shifting, and, for some, physical transformation.
Creating, not finding. That's a big shift.
This is a profound shift in thinking. The new authentic identity that emerges from this process is, in the end, altogether new. It was not in there all along, simply waiting to be released.
Wow.
It is rather a hard-fought achievement, a truly novel creation forged out of the individual's entire history of gender experience and their creative explorations of new forms of gendered self-expression.
This aligns beautifully with Lev's 2004 model of transgender emergence, which also emphasizes the individual's active engagement in instantiating a new sense of identity authenticity. It's an act of self-authorship.
This approach has incredible strength. First, it offers a necessarily broad time frame. The process of identity transition and transformation is seen as open-ended, potentially recursive, and can be revisited repeatedly as the individual occupies different contexts and integrates new traits into their emerging sense of self.
So it's not a one-and-done thing.
Definitely not. Second, it grants an incredibly active and autonomous role to the transgender individual. The specific nature and character of that authentic identity is truly in one's own hands, not dictated by social norms, therapists, or medical standards.
Empowering the individual.
Absolutely. And crucially, this means that mixed forms of gender presentation, those that might have previously been deemed incomplete from older linear developmental models based solely on transsexualism, are instead seen as authentic and viable identity outcomes.
It validates the full spectrum of experiences we discussed earlier. It makes space for every shade of the rainbow, not just two endpoints.
So, how might this impact your understanding as an elementary education major right there in the classroom?
How does DST help a teacher?
Instead of thinking of a child's gender identity as a fixed thing they either have or don't have, this theory suggests it's an ongoing creative process. As a teacher, you can foster an environment where children are empowered to explore and create their sense of self rather than feeling confined to rigid boxes.
Less about labels, more about exploration.
Exactly. For example, imagine you have a student, let's call them Kai, who at age 6 is very clearly presenting as a boy, but by age 9 begins to express a fascination with clothing typically associated with girls and says, "Sometimes I feel like a girl too."
Okay.
A teacher applying DST would see this not as confusion, but as a potential phase shift or an emerging aspect of Kai's self-organization. Instead of asking, "What's wrong?" the teacher's role becomes, "How can I support Kai's exploration?"
Shifting the focus from problem to process.
Right. This could involve supporting diverse interests, encouraging self-expression through various forms of play or creative arts, allowing for phase shifts in their understanding of themselves without pressure for a definitive label, and providing literature or examples that show different ways of being in the world.
It shifts the focus from diagnosis to active, supportive facilitation of self-discovery. That's a vital connection, demonstrating how these theories have direct relevance to everyday practice.
Now let's explore another critical area, the complex connections and interplay between gender identity and sexual identity.
Ah, yes, how these two relate or don't relate.
Historically, there was a deeply ingrained, almost presumed link between these two. It was thought that being attracted to women was a fundamental component of being a man, and being attracted to men was a fundamental component of being a woman.
Like they were two sides of the same coin?
Kind of. This often led to the conflation of same-sex desire with gender reversal, meaning gay men were often presumed to be inherently feminine and lesbians masculine, which is clearly a problematic and inaccurate oversimplification.
The old stereotype.
And this conflation has been vigorously critiqued over the years, thankfully. Empirical data has shown an incredible diversity in transgender individuals' experiences of same-sex and other sex desire, both before and after modifying their gender identities and presentations.
So the reality is much more varied.
Absolutely. For example, some male-to-female transsexuals seek female sexual partners and identify as lesbians, while others seek male partners and identify as heterosexual women.
Okay.
Similarly, some biologically female transgender individuals identify as highly masculine lesbians, while others take on identities as men and seek heterosexual female partners. The key takeaway here is that gender identity and sexual identity are fundamentally distinct constructs.
They are separate things.
Variability in one dimension simply doesn't neatly map onto the other. Your gender identity doesn't dictate who you're attracted to, and vice versa.
At the same time, this doesn't mean they are entirely unrelated. For some individuals, these two forms of identity reciprocally inform and influence one another.
How so?
Your experience of femaleness or maleness can be deeply integrated with your subjective understanding and experience of sexual desire. The very designation of a desire as same-sex or other sex often requires a stable appraisal of the gender status of everyone involved.
Ah, so your identity influences how you label your attraction.
Exactly. Which highlights how deeply embedded these experiences are within the social and interpersonal context of gender presentation. It's not surprising, then, that individuals who begin to explore multiplicity and fluidity with respect to their gender identity often become progressively more aware of multiplicity and fluidity in their erotic attractions as well.
Questioning one opens the door to questioning the other.
It can, yes. The act of questioning one aspect of identity can open the door to questioning others.
To make this dynamic interplay really concrete, let's look at the example of Mark, a participant in a significant longitudinal study of sexual identity development.
Okay, tell us about Mark.
Mark was born female and grew up with a conventional female gender identity. In his early 20s, he identified as lesbian, experiencing attractions to women.
So, started out identifying as a lesbian woman.
Right. However, over the years, he began to question his gender identity, eventually adopting a male gender presentation.
What's fascinating here is that as Mark delved deeper into the masculine sides of his personality and took on an increasingly masculine role in self-presentation and interpersonal interaction, he unexpectedly became attracted to men.
Unexpectedly, while still attracted to women.
Yes, though his attractions to women did not diminish. He described this saying, "It was odd. Guys would flirt with me, and I'd be like, hey, I don't mind that. That doesn't turn me off or make me angry or whatever, because it used to really annoy me, and it doesn't anymore."
Interesting. Why did he think that changed?
Mark connected this new experience of desire for men with his changed appraisal of men's social location relative to his own. He realized it was the traditional male-female heterosexual dynamic that he'd always found distasteful.
So once he identified as Mark, his desires for men and his interpersonal and sexual interactions with them no longer inhabited that conventional dynamic, and this shift opened up entirely new erotic possibilities for him.
The change in his own identity changed how he viewed interactions with men.
Exactly. He even described changes in the types of men he found attractive after taking on a masculine gender presentation, which were intriguingly related to issues of power and social location.
How so?
As Mark became more male himself, he became increasingly attracted to openly gay men. Despite still being biologically female and attracted to males, he experienced these desires as fundamentally homosexual, reflecting a gay male side of himself.
So he felt like a gay man attracted to other men.
Yes. He felt much more comfortable with his attractions and relationships with men than he had as a teenage girl. His experience powerfully indicates that the critical trigger for his sexual desires was not a stable, trait-like degree of femininity or masculinity in another person, but an interpersonal dialectic regarding gender and social relations.
Wow. So the social context in his own identity profoundly shifted his attractions.
This example powerfully illustrates how gender identity and sexual identity, while distinct, can be profoundly intertwined for some individuals. It clearly shows how personal identity shifts can open up entirely new social and erotic possibilities, challenging rigid categorizations.
It's not a simple one-to-one mapping. It really highlights the idea of identity as a dynamic system, where a change in one domain can ripple through and affect another in surprising and emergent ways.
And this level of complexity is precisely why a nuanced understanding is so vital for you as an elementary education major. It helps you appreciate that children's identities are not static.
Things aren't always simple or fixed.
Right. You might observe a student who is questioning aspects of their identity, and it might not just be their gender expression, but also how they relate to others in terms of friendship or attraction. It prepares you to respect the multifaceted and evolving selfhood you might observe in students as they grow, rather than trying to fit them into predefined boxes.
You're not just looking for fixed labels, but for the unfolding of a unique individual. This leads us to a critical area: the real-world impact of navigating transgender identity, particularly concerning mental health and support.
Yes, this is incredibly important.
What's consistently found in research is that social stigmatization, manifested in some cases by outright physical victimization, poses the preeminent threat to transgender individuals' mental and physical health. This is a stark truth we cannot ignore.
That's a truly disturbing statement, and it directly aligns with the minority stress model, a framework that helps explain these outcomes.
Tell us about that model.
This model explains that sexual minorities' acute exposure to environmental stressors, things like verbal or physical abuse, institutional discrimination, interpersonal harassment, and general social marginalization, leads to cumulative psychological stress.
It builds up over time.
This stress, in turn, negatively affects both mental and physical well-being. It's like a constant drip, drip, drip of negativity that erodes well-being over time.
And the data supporting this is truly disturbing. Institutional reports show that hate crimes against gender nonconforming individuals accounted for a staggering 1/5 of all documented murders in some years.
1/5? That's horrifying.
This is not just statistics. These are lives violently taken simply for being who they are. A survey of over 500 trans-identified people revealed devastating statistics. 28% had been in alcohol or drug treatment programs, 62% experienced gender discrimination, 83% experienced gender-related verbal discrimination.
So pervasive.
And a shocking 59% had experienced sexual assault. Most tragically, 32% reported attempted suicide, and among youth under 25, nearly half had attempted suicide specifically due to gender-based victimization.
Nearly half of young people. That's just heartbreaking. These numbers are a profound cry for help and action.
And these stressors are acutely present in school environments, which makes this particularly relevant for you as an educator.
Yes. What does it look like in schools?
Studies show that gender nonconforming adolescents routinely experienced taunting, teasing, and bullying at school. For instance, nearly all gender nonconforming adolescents in one study recorded school-based verbal and physical harassment.
Nearly all.
Yes, with three-quarters feeling unsafe and singled out several times a day in places like gym class or restrooms. Imagine the constant vigilance, the fear, the inability to truly relax and learn in that environment.
That makes learning almost impossible.
Furthermore, LGBT youth themselves reported that their gender nonconforming peers experienced more frequent verbal and physical abuse than they did. This paints a grim picture of the environment many young people are forced to navigate daily, simply for expressing their authentic selves.
Beyond external victimization, gender nonconforming adolescents face heightened psychosocial stress in their daily lives.
Internal struggles, too.
Yes. In addition to the normative stressors associated with adolescent development, they often struggle with an increasing awareness that their psychological sense of self does not neatly correspond to their body. Puberty must make that even harder. The physical changes brought about by puberty only heighten this discrepancy, potentially escalating a youth's sense of internal alienation and confusion. This can lead to profound feelings of isolation, depression, hopelessness, and invisibility. This internal battle, compounded by external hostility, is an immense burden.
And if left unchecked, this accumulation of stressors at home, at school, in their social circles can provoke sustained feelings of shame, alienation, and inadequacy. To cope, these youth may display a range of externalizing problems, including running away from home, dropping out of school, substance abuse, or self-harm.
Desperate coping mechanisms.
Some even resort to extreme risk-taking behaviors, such as self-injecting silicone or steroids to create a more feminine or masculine appearance when access to carefully monitored transitions is restricted. This highlights how desperately they seek congruence and comfort, even at tremendous personal risk, when safe and professional avenues are denied.
Given these significant risks and stressors, what conclusions can we draw about the healthiest trajectory for transgender identity development?
What's the best path forward?
Our source suggests that during adolescence it may be difficult or even impossible to predict which trajectory a particular youth is headed for. Although some adolescents may self-identify as transsexual early on, expressing clear desires for permanent gender change.
They might seem very certain.
It's important to remember that they might perceive this as the only outcome of gender questioning. The possibility of adopting a more fluid, liminal sense of gender may never have occurred to them, and they are unlikely to have visible models of such forms of gender fluidity in their immediate environment.
They might not even know other options exist.
So the healthiest identity trajectory for transgender adolescents may be one which makes no presumptions about desirable outcomes and sets no timetables for resolution, but instead remains open to multiple possibilities over potentially long periods of time.
Keeping options open, giving time.
Youth fundamentally need time, support, information, and autonomy as they grapple with their own sense of gendered selfhood and seek a comfortable and personally authentic constellation of female-typed, male-typed, and gender-neutral traits. Changes in this constellation, whether in cognition or appearance, and occurring throughout adolescence and adulthood, are part and parcel of the identity development process.
It's truly a marathon, not a sprint. One thing, however, is abundantly clear and absolutely non-negotiable.
What's that?
Neither transgender youth nor adults can embark on this process without a basic sense of safety.
Safety is paramount.
As long as transgender individuals are forced to navigate their school and family worlds with an ever-present debilitating fear of stigmatization, ostracization, humiliation, and physical violence, they cannot be expected to achieve a healthy sense of self-determination. Regardless of whether that self-determination involves a definitive gender transition or making peace with the lasting sense of gender fluidity. Safety is the bedrock upon which all healthy development is built.
This is where your expertise as an elementary education major becomes absolutely indispensable. Supportive adults play a key role in facilitating resilience and positive development for transgender youth.
Adults make a huge difference.
Decades of research on resilience across various populations show that adults can strengthen youth by teaching them how to respond positively to adversity. For transgender youth specifically, adults, and especially teachers, require special education and awareness. So what are the actionable strategies for you in the classroom? What does this actually look like in practice?
Okay, let's get practical. One critical strategy is learning and consistently using preferred names and pronouns.
Seems simple, but so important.
It is absolutely fundamental to gaining their trust and supporting their unique developmental pathway. For example, imagine a student, previously known as Sarah, using she pronouns, comes to you at the start of a new school year and says, "Actually, I prefer to be called Sam now," and use they/them pronouns.
Okay.
A teacher modeling correct usage immediately and gently correcting tears when they make a mistake, remember, Sam prefers they/them, sends an incredibly powerful message of respect and safety.
It tells Sam, I see you, I hear you, and this space is safe for you.
This simple act is a profound affirmation of their identity.
That's such a vital first step. Another crucial point is ensuring confidentiality.
Protecting their privacy.
This is vital for demonstrating to transgender youth that their safety will not be compromised, given the significant risks they typically face for discrimination and violence. Imagine a student confides their gender identity to you, their teacher, perhaps asking to use a different name only at school, not at home.
A common scenario.
You then have a profound responsibility to ensure this information is not shared with other students, or even with parents, without the student's explicit permission and a clear understanding of the potential risks to their safety outside of school.
This builds deep, invaluable trust and protects the child from potential harm.
And finally, a broader principle from resilience research applies here: nurturing their capacity to succeed.
Believing in them.
Young people flourish when they know that adults believe in them and actively nurture their capacity to succeed. In a classroom context, this could involve encouraging a transgender student to take on leadership roles in class projects, perhaps as a group leader or a class representative.
Giving them opportunities to shine.
Highlighting their unique perspectives in class discussions, or providing opportunities for them to be visible and proud role models for others if and when they choose to do so. This empowers them, builds their self-efficacy, and shows them that their identity is a source of strength, not a hindrance.
And as an overarching theme of this entire section on school experiences, it's about creating truly safe spaces.
The foundation for everything else.
This isn't a single strategy, but a pervasive environment you cultivate. This means implementing clear anti-bullying policies that specifically address gender-based harassment, ensuring access to gender-neutral restrooms if available, and proactively educating the entire class on the respect for diversity and individual differences through age-appropriate lessons and discussions.
Like setting classroom norms.
Exactly. It could be as simple as saying, in our classroom, we celebrate everyone for who they are, and we use kind words and actions towards all our friends no matter what. This creates an environment where exploration of self is not just tolerated, but truly safe and encouraged.
It's about letting kids be kids and letting them discover who they are without fear of judgment or harm.
These strategies aren't just about managing a situation. They're about actively fostering an environment where every child feels seen, respected, and empowered to explore their authentic self. They are fundamental building blocks for healthy development.
We've covered so much ground today. We started with the very foundations of identity, clearly distinguishing between sex and gender.
The basics.
And then dove deep into the rich, diverse, and often non-linear landscape of transgender experience. We challenged those outdated dichotomous models and embraced the idea of identity as a dynamic, continually created phenomenon thanks to new frameworks like dynamical systems theory.
Moving beyond the binary to see identity as a process.
We also saw the complex interplay between gender identity and sexual identity, showing how they can mutually influence each other, defying simple categorizations.
And we didn't shy away from the real-world impact, highlighting the profound threat that social stigmatization and discrimination pose to the mental and physical health of transgender individuals.
A hard truth, but necessary.
But we also emphasized the indispensable role of supportive adults, especially teachers, in fostering resilience and positive development through concrete actions, like using preferred names and pronouns, ensuring confidentiality, nurturing their capacities, and creating safe, nurturing environments.
Practical steps for making a real difference. For you, an elementary education major, this understanding is absolutely vital. Consider how these insights about the fluidity of identity, the paramount importance of safety, and the transformative power of supportive environments don't just apply to transgender individuals.
How does it broaden out?
What does it mean for all children's development? How can we apply the lessons of acknowledging complexity and embracing individualized journeys to foster self-actualization and well-being in every single student?
It's a great question.
Think about it. If identity is a journey of creation, not just discovery, how can you empower all your students to be active authors of their own lives?
Fostering that sense of agency.
If we understand that gender identity can be fluid and nonlinear, how might that inform how you encourage diverse interests in children, ensuring boys feel just as comfortable in the art corner as girls, and vice versa?
Breaking down those old gendered expectations in play and learning.
What if we understood that a healthy identity might, in fact, be characterized by a fundamental liminality for many aspects of self, not just gender?
Embracing the in-between states for everyone.
This isn't just about understanding others, it's about deepening our understanding of human identity itself and how we can best nurture it in every child we teach. What new possibilities does this open up for fostering true self-actualization in your classroom?